Everyone, welcome back to the How to Podcast series. I'm excited to have someone on my screen because I see this person often on my screen. Part of our amazing meetup community over on meetup.com. We get together on a regular basis, and Bill shows up and brings great wisdom, great knowledge, and a great speaking voice, which makes me happy. And Bill Monty's on the podcast as my guest co-host. He's got multiple shows. He's going to talk about that here on the show. And we're going to just talk about podcasting. And if you live in South Florida, Bill's your next best friend. So everyone reach out to Bill if you live there, because he'd like to meet you. Bill Monty on the How to Podcast series. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. It's great to be here. And yes, if you're in South Florida, I'd love for you to reach out to me, billmonty04@gmail.com, or talesfromsouthflorida.com is the best place to go to get more information on me and the show.
There you go. And if you want to visit South Florida, you want to move to South Florida, you know somebody in South Florida, then they need to hear about Bill's podcast for sure. Right, Bill?
Absolutely. South Florida, Florida sometimes gets a bad rap nationally and everything else, going back to the hanging chads of the election of 2000 and Florida man, everywhere you go is Florida man did this, or there's a Florida man who did this, and it's certainly not a wonderful spotlight on our state. But the fact is that Florida, and South Florida in particular, it's more than Disney World. It's more than amusement parks. There's a lot of culture. There's a lot of history. There are a lot of wonderful people. There are a lot of big names and stars that have come from South Florida and that do things in South Florida. The singer Pitbull is Mr. 305, and, he certainly brings a lot to it. So that's what my podcast about South Florida, the idea for it came from, was let me kind of go out and talk about what a great place this is and what it was like to grow up here. Because my family moved here in 1965. We came from Texas. I was a wee lad. And, so I grew up in a really great time. And it was a time when South Florida was very seasonal. So literally, after Easter, so somewhere around April or beginning of May, all of the tourists, all the snowbirds, as we call them, would go back up north. And for that period until right like early October, mid-October, it was almost a ghost town. Hard to think of that now when you think of how big Miami Beach, Fort Lauderdale, all the growth here. But it would literally, things would just empty out. Stores and businesses would close for that time because there weren't enough people to keep it going.
Wow.
So it was a great place to grow up. Sunshine and beaches and Elvis showing up every now and then to shoot a movie. I mean, who could ask for anything more?
There you go. Yeah, and I guess a lot of Canadians come down and spend time there, and they're part of that vacuum that they go back north again. So what do you love most about Florida? Like, what is it that keeps you there?
Wow. I guess it's home. I think that's what it is more than anything else. I have certainly, I've left a couple times when I was a younger person. I got married early and we moved to North Carolina. There was a time right after high school when I went out to LA for a little while, but I always came back here. And I think the reason is I'm just comfortable. I do things like, I wish we had colder weather sometimes. I wish it was more seasonal. I wish the leaves changed color. But for the most part, it's really a comfortable place, and the people are nice, and there's a lot of different cultures. You can go from one city to the next, or one area or one town to the next, and maybe it becomes mostly Hispanic. And you have all these wonderful Hispanic restaurants, this wonderful Hispanic culture that's there to greet you, and their celebrations and the way that they do things. Then you have a Caribbean influence down here.
Yeah.
So you're exposed to all of this and without feeling overwhelmed. And that really is what I think is just a driving force of being down here. Now, I will say it has in the last few years become extremely expensive to live. And I guess that might be true of a lot of the nation right now. But if you're planning to move to South Florida, the one thing I will say is check your bank account, because it's very expensive because of the hurricanes. The property insurance, homeowners insurance is very high. So if you're going to own a house, you need to know that. But, we have, it's just, I don't know, it's Florida, it's South Florida. And I think the same for many people, it's where I grew up. So, it's home. That's why I stay. That's why I kept coming back. And that's why I stay.
It's good. I'm glad you have a podcast. It's a local podcast. We brought this up in the meetups, that there's basically two types of podcasts that are underserved, audiences that are underserved in podcasting. And what's interesting about you, Bill, is you actually are hitting both of them and doing it very well, by the way, is a local podcast because people wanting to come to South Florida, maybe move to South Florida, they're looking for a real estate agent or they want to know more about the area, all that kind of stuff. They will look for a podcast about South Florida. That's where I want to move to. So that's where I'm going to do my research and you will show up. That's amazing. I just did a Google search before we jumped on and you were like on the top of the list, which is amazing. So there's something about you and your podcast that's catching attention. The other underserved audience is people like over 50, in their 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s. That age group, very underserved in podcasts. There's not a lot of content that brings people to podcasting because there's a big vacuum. You talk about people leaving South Florida and that like places closing down. That's happening in podcasting where people are coming to podcasting in their late 50s and all that. And they're looking at the content going, well, I don't see myself here. So I'm not going to be a podcast listener. And the potential podcast listeners looking for a podcast for anything over 50 in content, age-wise, they're the ones that have disposable income. They're the ones that have more time. They're the ones that are maybe making big life changes. They're looking for content that suits where they are in life. And that's your other podcast. So of the two areas underserved in podcasting, you are hitting both, which I find amazing. And you're a great example. When I talk to people and they're like, Dave, I want to start a podcast. I don't know what to talk about. I'm like, go check out Bill Monty because he's doing exactly what you need to do, no matter where you live in this world, or if you want to serve a generation underserved in podcasting. You are the textbook example that I used for people to go check out what you're doing. So congratulations for hitting both of these underserved areas in podcasting. It's amazing.
Yeah, thanks. Well, that shows what you can do when you have no idea what you're doing. So I have to say, at the time when I started, so as a little bit of context, I do have a bit of a radio background. It's not a heavy radio background, but back in the late 90s, me and my co-host, Jeff Allen Wolf, I would say briefly, over the span of about 3 years, we were on radio in South Florida, doing talk radio, which was dying out at the time. As I say to him all the time, boy, do we have perfect timing, right? We just came on right as we're coming on board right when the ship was letting everyone all on land. So I have that, and I have a theater background, entertainment. So I was an actor for years, performing mostly stage, but a lot of film work, a lot of voiceovers and things like that. And hadn't done it for quite a while. And I was working in a place that provides services to seniors in the South Florida area. And I was a little frustrated with the calls we would get that the people didn't seem to know where to go to or where to turn to get help. By the time they reached out to us, some of them were in panic mode. So caregivers caring for an elderly parent or spouse, and they thought they had a handle on it. And then, when you're dealing with things like maybe dementia, it can go south so fast for you. And all the planning that you thought you did, and well, I'll pick up the phone and call someone for help. And when you do, you're told, well, yes, we can help you, but there's a wait list. And that wait list is maybe a year long. And you need help tomorrow. You need help yesterday.
Yeah.
So I would kind of lamenting about this at lunch one day. And some of the younger coworkers of mine, millennials, one kind of jokingly said, hey, with your background, you should do a podcast. Now, I kind of knew what podcasts were, but I didn't really. And I laughed and I said, well, what on earth would I do a podcast about? And he goes, everything that you moan about here at lunch. And I said, well, do people my age listen to podcasts? And he goes, no, but maybe someone will. So I started doing research. I read books. I went on YouTube and I started saying, you know what? Maybe this is actually something I could do. Maybe I could help somebody. I didn't do it for, of course, the first thought is, well, this will become some kind of side hustle. It'll bring in some kind of money. I'll get, obviously, my friends and family will support me and they'll put it on their Facebook and they'll tell all their friends and family. And it might take 3 or 4 episodes, but I should hit 1 million views or listens somewhere around 3 or 4 episodes, right?
Obviously.
Yeah. It doesn't work quite that way. So lesson number 1 for everyone, if you're starting a podcast, best of luck to you, but be aware of the realities of podcasting, especially if you don't go into it really with a solid plan and solidly knowing what's going on. So on top of that was, I'm going to be creating a podcast for an age that doesn't listen to podcasts. So what do I do then? How do I do this? And I just started tinkering with it at that point. And the initial response was actually pretty good. It was pretty strong. And it just helped me to keep building and building. I started getting people reaching out to me and saying, hey, I heard this episode that you did. And I will say probably the first year or so that I was doing it, maybe 7 or 8 months, it really was kind of a how to get help if you need it, how to cut cable if you can't pay your cable bill anymore, but still watch all those, here's how you stream if you don't know how to do that. Here's how you apply for Medicare. I literally took 2 or 3 episodes and talked to them about how I applied for Social Security and all the things you need to be aware of. And here's the documents that you need. And here's how long it's going to take. And here's what they're going to tell you. So it really was kind of a how to get older.
Yeah. And
through that, I started realizing that I could also just talk about my experiences of getting older and that might be more valuable. So the first season was kind of a how to get older. And the second season is that I'm focusing on is kind of life lessons of becoming older, of being older, but not being old. That's the big thing. I always say this podcast is for young people who have lived a very long time. And that it's not about being old, it's about getting older. And life as you age can teach you some really wonderful things. And there's a lot of advantages to being older. Obviously, there's some disadvantages, I'll speak for myself. The mind doesn't work as quick as it used to. The body doesn't react as quickly, things like that. But your attitude and your knowledge of the way the world works and how things work, when you start lowering your expectations as you age, the world is not so frightening and not so frustrating. There's no reason to believe that it's going to be one way when for 60 some odd years it has never been that way. So stop thinking it will be and live in the world that you live in. And that's like one of the things that I've learned. And that's one of the things that I like talking about on the show is be aware of where you are, be aware of what's around you and who's around you, and be thankful for that. It's time to stop the wishing that we can do when we're younger. It's time to stop hoping, time to stop planning for one day. One day I'll do this, one day I'll do that. One day is today at a certain point. And you need to understand that. So it's been an interesting journey so far. And I've met some wonderful people like in the meetup group. And I've had some great experiences. And I can say there really hasn't been a negative aspect of it. So, I think that's kind of like that part of it. So Bill Monty's Guide for Getting Older is the name of that podcast, and available wherever podcasts can be found. Mm-hmm. And I just I hope people listen, that they enjoy it, that they reach out and they share their experiences, because like you were saying, this is kind of an underserved audience here. And I would say that if you're a caregiver and you need to hear a friendly voice or some good advice or solid advice, then, give a listen, because I can steer you in the right direction if you don't know quite right now what to do or where to go to.
So when you look at your analytics and your stats and all that stuff for your show, are you hitting your target market? Are you seeing that age group listening to the show?
Yes.
Or any surprises at all when you look at your stats?
The only surprise was when I see things like the people are listening in London or the Philippines or Spain. Or there's even one I can't even pronounce, Herzegovina, something. And I'm like, really? I have listeners there? So if you're listening, I'm sorry I can't pronounce the name of the country you're listening from. But thank you so much for listening. I do appreciate it.
Right.
So I think that was the biggest surprise, is that oddly enough, where I thought there would be the groundswell from my local community is, one of my most vocal supporters actually lives in New York. And, often writes to me to tell me how much he appreciates, and he'll comment on I enjoyed this episode. It really, I really related to that. So I think that's the part of it that amazes me. Absolutely. The demographic for the show is probably 50 and up.
Right.
But I could say that if you are certainly in your 30s or 40s, you could be listening and find something, because again, it might not be for you, but there might be a relative or someone that you know, or a neighbor, that this would be good information for. So, and I try to keep the episode short. One of the things I found early on was brevity is your friend. So, but my first episodes were probably about 25 minutes to 30 minutes long for the first, I would say 7 or 8 episodes. And part of that problem was, and again, going back to believing that it would be family and friends from long ago on Facebook who would be the supporters. They might want to know also what I'm up to. So there was this mix of, here's this advice for getting older, and then suddenly the second half of it would be, and here's what Bill's doing. Here's the music I'm listening to, or here's a great book I read. And when I would look at the analytics and see where people dropped off, they dropped off when I started talking about, here's what Bill read and here's the music I've been listening to. So quickly dropped all that. And so the average episode is about 15 minutes now for this podcast and for the South Florida one too.
Interesting. For my dad's space podcast, I was looking at my stats, and I had a listener in Japan. I'm like, who would find my show, first of all, when they're in Japan? And I'm like, and then I found out that this person is serving in a military base in Japan. They're from the U.S. And I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense. So they're listening to a little bit of home while they're away from their family, and they're missing their children, and they're wanting to connect with stuff about dads.
Yeah.
I'm like, I didn't even put 2 and 2 together in that someone's serving overseas, and this is their connection with home. I'm like, well, okay, now my world is bigger. Just realizing that it could be somebody that's just away from home and just looking for something that feels like home when they're so far from their family. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That, I often think that, and I also think that when we talk about aging, it's universal. So when I look at, we talk about being a father or father things, that's universal if you are a parent. And parenting doesn't go away just because your child turns 18. So it's actually something, my daughter's 32 now. I still feel towards her as I did when she was 5, as if there's something I can teach her, if there's still things I can do, even though she's more annoyed by it now. But, absolutely, the love and the caring that you have doesn't stop. So, you want to hear that from someone else. And the universality of aging is there for everyone. So it doesn't matter if you're in South Florida or the Philippines or New York or wherever it might be. We're all going through experiencing. We have the same cultural memories. We have the same fears. We have the same triumphs, and we have the same low moments. And sometimes it's nice to hear that someone else talking about it and go, oh, it's not just me. Wow. Okay. That's cool. I'm good with that.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter if you're 18 or 75, you're one day older than you were yesterday. So technically everyone is your audience, but you're focused on more of that older generation, which I love.
Yeah. And then there was about halfway through doing that, I thought to myself, well, this is fun. I did think to myself, to me, it was feeling, I needed something else. I wanted to podcast about something else that was more personal for me. And I kept going through Facebook and seeing I grew up in Fort Lauderdale. I grew up in Florida. And I thought, well, what if I did that? But instead of posting pictures and putting a post up with a memory saying, does anyone remember this restaurant or this place or something like that? What if I did a podcast and each podcast would focus on one of those things that I'm seeing people talk about? And then I'll put my own personal spin. So when I went to this place, here was my experience and here's the history of it, yada, yada, yada. And so that became Tales from South Florida, which launched in January of 2024. And that's been, now you talk about a reach. So apparently people who live in South Florida have branched out to all over the world. I think I'm in like 115 countries,
Wow. Wow.
which is like amazing to think about. Um, to that, but people from all these different places are locking into this idea of South Florida and the history of it. So I try to keep each episode where it's not alienating people who have never been to South Florida. So if you like history, if you like hearing about, different things, if you ever watched Miami Vice, then my podcast is for you. Did you ever watch Flipper? My podcast is for you. Did you ever hear of a man named Henry Flagler who started Standard Oil back in the 1800s and became a very rich man? Well, he basically is the reason people go to Key West now. Why is that? He built the train that went from Jacksonville to Key West. So, there's a lot of what happened here in Florida that reaches out to more of the world outside of just Miami-Dade County, Broward County, Palm Beach County, and over to the west coast of Florida. So that's been exciting. And I've been able to do some fun things with the website, which I just launched. It's talesfromsouthflorida.com. So I created a playlist, a Spotify playlist. So if you go to the website, you can actually listen to a playlist of songs that relate to the episodes that I've put into Tales from South Florida. So,
Smart.
So you can hear the theme from Miami Vice. You can hear the theme from Flipper. You can hear the music that I was listening to in 1968 when I talk about growing up in South Florida and riding my bike around and going fishing, or when my parents, I would go to the Everglades, things like that. This is the music that was, I like to say that the music that inspired the episodes, and the episodes were kind of inspired by the times and the music. So I thought that was a nice dimension to put into it, a nice little flavor. So it's good to have fun with that also. So it's a little more playful than Bill Monty's Guide for Getting Older. There's a couple of more areas to go into with Tales from South Florida, but they're both a lot of fun. And I think, of course, I'm biased, but I think they're a good way to spend some time. Listen, you can listen to Tales from South Florida driving from Miami to Orlando and back, and you can listen to Bill Monty the entire time telling you the history of Florida.
It's good. So, Bill, we got a lot of people listening to the show that are at different stages of their journey in podcasting. They're coming here looking for inspiration from another podcaster. They want to listen to a new podcast, which is great. We got lots for them to listen to from you. But let's talk to that podcaster that's listening. And what can you do to encourage them today in their journey? What are your thoughts, like for somebody who's maybe struggling with their show, maybe looking at continuing with their podcast? They don't really see a lot of response from their audience, and they're like kind of making that decision, like, should I continue? Should I not continue? I'm not getting a lot of feedback. What would you say to them?
I would say, first, if you're thinking about doing a podcast and you haven't started yet because you're trying to make it perfect, just hit the record button. Script out if you need to, write out a script, write out an outline. Even if that episode that you record, no one ever hears but you will learn a lot about you and your podcast from doing it. So don't be afraid, because if you don't like it or you think it's terrible, you don't ever have to play it for anybody. You don't ever have to put it out there. But if you're like me, I think what will happen is you go, well, that's not very good. How can I make it better? And you'll tweak it and you'll try it again. I probably did about 4 to 6 recordings before I ever recorded one that I said, okay, I'm happy with this one. So just, do it. And there was the old Nike commercial, just do it. I say for podcasting, there's that. For those who have started and you're not setting the world on fire the way you thought you would, that's okay. Because maybe your message is hitting the right people or the right person that it needs to hit. I've had podcast episodes that have only had 20 downloads, but that's 20 people who enjoyed it. So it resonated with the right people for that time. At first, I used to get really frustrated. I used to think, well, I'm not going to do this anymore. This is a waste of my time. But then I thought about it, and I would hear people say, and you've reiterated this also, Dave, since I met you, it's not about the numbers. It's about what you're doing. It's about the quality of what you're doing. It's about the message you're trying to send out. So I would say what is the message you're trying to send out? How important is it to you? And start looking at, there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of great books. There's a lot of great people. And there's YouTube that will teach you how to do some things with marketing. So search engine optimization, SEO, keywords, social media. You've got to find the one that works for you. And I would also say, hold off on the impulse to spend a lot of money when people say they will get you a lot of downloads. They will. They'll get you a lot of downloads, but no one will hear your podcast. But they will get you a lot of downloads. They're bots. And so just be careful of that. But be true to it. And then don't be afraid to tweak it. This is your show. You can do Bill Monty's Guide for Getting Older used to be called Bill Monty's Guide to Getting Older. And about halfway through, that wasn't resonating with me anymore. And the original artwork that I thought was great, because there was my face shining, and I realized no one is listening to this for me. They don't know who I am. So I changed the artwork to reflect what the show is about. I have re-edited episodes that I just didn't care for and made them better by doing that. There are things you can do. So be true to yourself, be true to your vision, be true to your podcast. And at that time, you'll find you're being true to your audience. And once you make that connection, they'll be there for you. So don't focus on numbers, especially initially. Don't worry about it. Just do your show and do the best show you can possibly do. And I think you'll be happy. Now, if you're really unhappy with it, you might have to sit back and reflect, is this what I really want or need to be doing? But if you had the passion to even think about doing it to begin with, that's a huge step right there. So follow it. I think you'll have a lot of fun. I know I do. It's here. Someone asked me a while back, they said, why do you podcast? And I had to be honest and say, I'm going to say for a very selfish reason, it's my way of trying to be immortal. Because your podcast will live long after you stop podcasting. I can't tell you how many times I'm searching for a podcast and I'll look at the last episode was 2017, or something like that. So long after I have shuffled off this mortal coil and joined the choir invisible, if someone wants to hear about South Florida, they can search South Florida and my podcast is going to pop up. And my experiences and my voice and my stories are going to live beyond me. And there's something kind of cool about that. There's something, to me anyway, there's something that's kind of nice to know that you are making your own little footprint in the sand that's going to stick around for a while.
I was listening to James Cridlin from Pod News. He was being interviewed on a podcast, and he said, the one thing that's so unique about podcasting is that your podcast is up against and with a collection of other podcasts, and you're up with the best of the best. Like some of the most popular people in the world having a podcast, your show is right next to theirs. Now try to do that on television. Go create your own television station and see how long that takes.
Yeah.
And how much money that. Go create your own radio show and go get a radio tower and go get all that. Or go get a newspaper. Go get a magazine and get on the magazine stand at the checkout counter. Go try to get yourself next to everyone else in a creative space. Podcasting is so unique that you can be right next door to the best show in the world with hundreds of thousands of downloads. And then there's you, there's me. We're in that same space. And I'm like, what a great experience. What a great opportunity to know that your voice is being captured. There's legacy. And there's reach. You talked about like 100 plus countries for your show. Like there's no boundaries, time, place, into the future. People are going to press play on this episode years from now. And where will we be? I don't know, but somebody's going to press play on this. And that's what I love about podcasting is it's just taken away all of the restrictions and given us this platform to talk about the things that mean something to us and to build community as well.
And that's something else too. It's a great way to give back. If you're doing something locally, or if you're doing something for a very niche audience, I guess, it is certainly a way to build community. It is certainly a way to support those all around you. And how often do you get a chance to do that? I'm a big believer, and every day we should try to always make a difference in someone's life. And, sometimes when I say that, people go, well, that's a very lofty kind of thing, what do you mean? Like, cure cancer or something like that. I said, sometimes you can just hold a door open for someone who would struggle to walk through a door, and you've made a big difference in their life that day. If you're in a store and someone can't reach that item on the top shelf and you just do it for them and hand it to them, expecting nothing in return, you've made a difference in someone's life. Sometimes just a smile or a kind word, which is so lacking in the world today, is enough to make a difference in someone's life. And I think podcasting allows you to do that on a larger scale. So if you need a larger scale to do it, if it's not enough just to hold that door open for someone, then podcasting is a way to make a difference in someone's life. Again, when the gentleman from New York writes to me and says, I loved what you did. I loved that episode. It took me back. It made me think. It made me reflect. Wow. If that's the only thing I ever did with any of my podcasts, it has been well worth it.
Yeah. And I think going back to your Getting Older podcast, I'm in my early 50s and I'm realizing that there's less days ahead of me than there are ever before. And I'm realizing that I'm at this tipping point where I'm like, wow, I want my legacy to continue. I want my voice to continue. My dad passed away like 20 years ago. I would give everything I own, Bill, to hear his voice, to be able to press play and hear him talk. I don't have anything really recorded with his voice because it wasn't around back then. So, I just love the idea that we can get out there and share our voice, share our story. It's a gift to our family. Our voice continues on. I just love that. The whole idea around community. Talk a little bit about how you're building community around your podcast. If you have any plans to do that, is anything working for you to build community adjacent to your podcast?
I would say, for me, phase one of all this journey was just doing it and getting it out there and getting probably where I am now. Getting the website out there is I think, the start of phase two for me. Good. So when we look at marketing, one of the things I have found the most frustrating about podcasting is the marketing aspect of it. I initially thought, especially with Tales from South Florida, that all I would have to do is reach out to these other I grew up in wherever groups and say, hey, you guys were talking about the Hollywood Sportatorium. Well, I've got an episode about it on my podcast, and that all 16,000 people in that group would come clamoring over. Well, the fact of the matter is that, a lot of people did come from that, but they didn't necessarily stay for the next episode. They came for that thing that they wanted to hear about that time, and it didn't necessarily go to that. So that became a real frustration. And also, without having the website back then, I was having to take that episode link and put it into all these different Facebook pages, all these different social media sites. And that was taking me like an hour out of my day just to put it out there and hope someone clicked on it, or hope I didn't get banned from the group for spamming because they think I'm trying to sell something. Yeah. So part two of all this, phase two for me, is going to be starting that build and that outreach of community and building the community. So, I'd love to get out to some local, it's kind of easier to do at this time of year, local fairs, arts and craft shows, get some merch created, and things that I can hand out, little things that I can hand out to get people interested. It's a very grassroots way to do things, I understand, but it's kind of what I'm comfortable with. I have a marketing background, and it's from back in the day when grassroots was actually something you did. We all lived by rave cards back then. We didn't really have social media or websites to do anything for us. So that feels a little more comfortable to me. And then starting to do things like being a guest on other podcasts, is the other way to do it and to kind of spread the word. And I just hope someone comes and they enjoy what they're doing, and maybe they tell a friend, or if they just want to keep it to themselves and they come back for the next episode, I'm perfectly happy with that too. So that's kind of where I'm at in the community plan right now. And it'd be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah, there's a lot of tools that we can leverage. There's newsletters, social media, your website. For me, I started our meetups for the How to Podcast series because I wanted to encourage other podcasters and give them a safe place to get together and talk podcasting without feeling like intimidated or that they didn't have a voice. I want people to come in and go, I don't know anything about anything. I'm going to ask some really stupid questions that I think feel stupid to me, but I want to be able to ask this in a group where other people are going to build me up. And I started our meetups, and the first two or three, I sat there by myself, Bill. Nobody showed up. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Why am I giving up time to sit here and there's nobody here? And then all of a sudden, somebody showed up, and then someone else showed up. And now we've been doing these for a while now. And what I love about the meetups that we're doing is it's not about me. It's not a Dave show. It's an us show where we all get together. And I found even today on our meetup, I didn't even talk as much as I might normally talk because the group just kind of took the conversation on, and I got to sit back and listen. It's fun to do that. I'm trying to encourage more people to come join our meetups just so that they can meet each other and support each other. So I'm going to ask for a shameless plug from you, Bill. Can you explain to people the power of getting together with other podcasters, whether at a conference or a meetup, whatever? Why is that so important to meet other people that do what we do?
It's so important because you really don't have feedback from anywhere. So I'm going to say this, and in the hopes of not offending family or friends of mine. The people who will support you the least when you start a podcast, unfortunately, are your friends and family. And I don't mean that in any kind of mean way or like I'm ticked about it or anything, but I initially thought that's what it would be. And someone once explained to me, they said, well, Bill, let's say you opened a hot dog stand and your family and friends stopped by and they bought a hot dog the first day. Maybe they came back the second day. They're not going to come every day and eat your hot dogs. You're going to have to build your own customer base. And I kind of went, oh, okay. Yeah, I kind of get that. So they will support you to a certain extent, but they're not going to be your biggest fans. So getting feedback, honest feedback on what you're doing and having a group of people who answer the questions, like you said, the questions you think, well, this is so dumb, I would never ask this out loud because everyone else must know the answer and I'm just stupid. It's invaluable. I can tell you that and if you're thinking of being a podcaster, so I'm going to do the plug here, you need to be a part of this meetup group. It's on Saturday mornings, and Dave has started it on Tuesdays, I think, during the week. Right. I unfortunately am working at that time, or I'd be a part of that one too. And it is the most selfless group of people. They're nice. They're caring. They offer their support. They reach out to you. You can reach out to them with questions beyond the hour and a half of the meetup or 2 hours, whatever it might be. There isn't another group out there that I'm aware of, and I've been a part of several different groups, and none of them have been like this before. It is unique. I mean, Dave, you have, kudos to you and thank you. You have created something that if this were replicated in a lot of other businesses even, but even more in the podcasting world, the world would be a better place because it really is a safe place of kind, good people. And the only reason being there is to learn and to share. And that's something you just don't get every day in this world. So I would say, if you're listening to the podcast, I have become a huge fan of Dave's How to Podcast series. I listen all the time now. Imagine that friendly voice that you hear welcoming you and thanking you all the time during the podcast, being in charge of this group. And then, like you said, he kind of asks the questions and then the group just takes off with it. It's like a great college course or anything like that you just couldn't get anywhere else. And I am so glad and so grateful that I am a part of this group. There's no other way to put it. It's really something special.
Yeah, I'm trying to build a meetup group around the idea that there's the wisdom in the counsel of many. Mm-hmm. And I love the idea that we all come and we all contribute. We all put our 2 cents in, and we may disagree or see things differently, or we might have a different approach to how we do what we do, but nobody ever feels like they're talked down to. That's a big part of what I try to do in podcasting is I'm really tired of anybody that talks down to people or makes them feel like they're not welcome or they don't have a voice in the group. I've been in meetups, we talked about this, where I've sit there as an audience member and never given the opportunity to speak. And I'm like, I don't feel like I want to come back. Like, I don't feel like I was ever welcomed or acknowledged, and I wanted our meetup to be different than that. So, and again, I didn't want it to be a Dave fest because that's just my opinion. And my opinion is only my opinion. It might not work for you. So let's get Bill's opinion on how he does his show. And let's bring Sharon in and let's bring JJ and all these people because it helps us to get a better perspective. So I just like the idea that there's more wisdom with more voices. That's kind of the whole underlying theme of the meetup.
And everyone that's in the group has a very different podcast than mine in terms of like the subject matter. But in terms of like everything else, we all have this commonality among us and that we all had the same questions. We face the same problems and we're just there supporting each other. So if that's what you sought out to create as a safe environment for people to be creative, you did it. Congratulations.
Well, you're a big part of it, Bill. So I really appreciate that.
And if I could ask, I could ask you a quick question, because this is something I haven't had a chance to do. You do 8 podcasts?
8, yeah. I have a problem.
So when did you start podcasting? Back when?
2019, 2020, around there, just in and around close to the pandemic, I guess.
Okay. And did it grow? Like you started with 1 and then at the end of 1 year you said, no, I'm going to make it 2 and then 2 became 3. So
yeah,
is it?
It's an addiction.
Yeah. Because I'll be honest with you, I find 2 to be overwhelming at times. And you work, right?
I work full-time nights. Yeah. I do this during the daytime. So. Yeah.
So have you fit sleep in anywhere or?
Well, I worked last night and I slept for 2 hours, went to our meetup. Now I'm here with you. It's like 2 p.m. for me right now. And then I go back to work tonight. So I'll sleep about 4 or 5 o'clock this evening into tonight and then go back to work. So that's kind of my day.
Okay. And if I could ask, can you list the names of your podcasts beyond this one?
Oh yeah. So yeah, I actually have to pull it up because there's a few. Well, we have the How to Podcast series, which you are on right now. This is one that I really love because I get to meet great people like you, Bill. Without this show, I don't know how we would have connected. And now I know your podcast as well. So that's the one I love. I'm a musician, so I've been doing music for 45 years. And so I've done a lot of recording and all that stuff. So one of my podcasts is the Add to My Playlist podcast. And that was done primarily. Spotify had a way where you could insert music into a podcast. Then they took it away. So I'm trying to think of how I'm going to continue with the show, but I could actually have playable songs embedded in the podcast without making you leave to your Spotify playlist thing. My songs were in the show. So I could queue up the song, talk about the song, play the song, and then come back and talk about another song. It was really fun. I loved it. It was so cool. So that's my Add to My Playlist podcast. It was a Spotify exclusive. So that was that one. I have Living My Side Hustle. It's a podcast for anybody that does something on the side, of which I do all the time. So that's another one. I have the Upcycle Canada podcast. It's where we take things that people don't want, and instead of recycling them, we upcycle. So it used to be one thing, and we turn it into something totally different and keep it out of the landfill. So that's the thing that my wife and I started a little business about 10 years ago, and we upcycle products, keep them out of the landfill. So we had our little business and everything. So that's that podcast. I did that one with my wife, Jen. I have Living the Next Chapter podcast, which is an author podcast that has almost 500 episodes in 3 years. And I'm not an author, but I interview authors, and I get to meet people from around the world, Hollywood actors, musicians, anybody that's written anything, Netflix writers. It's amazing. It's a really fun podcast. I have Dad Space, podcast for dads by dads, because I'm an empty nest dad, and my 3 children are out of the house now. So I want to share dad lessons and life lessons with other dads and give them tools to help them be a better dad, and bring other dads on to talk about their dad's story. So that one's fun for me. I love that one. I have the Daily Santa podcast, which is daily 25 episodes in a row for children leading up to Christmas, where we count down to Christmas. And it's all kind of like AI voices with me mixed in the mix. And again, it's all for kids. I always want to do a kids podcast. So that was fun. So that's it's live 365 days a year, but primarily focused on December 1st to December 25th. And then I have the podcast editing and support show, where I help podcasters find an editor and editors to find a podcaster, where we can talk about how to hire somebody and how to find a good editor and what does good sound like. And we kind of get more into that side of podcasting. So that one's really fun to do, and I really enjoy that one. And then on top of that, I do edit for other people as well. So I'm an editor helping other shows. So all that's on my True Media Solutions website. But those are my podcasts. And I love every one of them. And I wish I had more time because I do more. But my wife's like, that's enough. That's enough. That's enough.
That's great. And I'm glad I got that list down. So now I can start listening, because I was like searching. I was like, okay, where's Other Dave podcast? So.
Well, you're brave. If you need more Dave in your life, you're very brave. It's good. So Bill, I want to wrap up with this, because I think again, going back to the legacy piece, I really think that's important. I love that you're doing that through your podcasting journey. I'll kind of give you my answer to kind of frame what I'm kind of going for with this question. I think my purpose in life is to collect people. That's my goal. If I was to walk out of a room and the people that know me, my family, my community, my friends, all that, if they could talk freely and openly about me, I want them to say that Dave collected people. You're part of my collection, Bill. I just love meeting new people and expanding my community one person at a time. That brings a lot of joy to me. And through podcasting, that gives me the opportunity to do that. So again, I've had conversations with people I should never have time with, and people I would never meet otherwise. So I feel that's my mission in life, is to collect people. What's your mission in life, Bill Monty? What is that thing that, if you could kind of narrow it down for us, it could be podcast related, it could just be life in general. But what is Bill Monty's purpose? Why are you here?
For me, and I think it's, if I walked out of the room, or when I'm no longer here, if people say, well, what about Bill was special? I would like people to say he made a difference. And if that was on I plan to be cremated and put out to sea, so there won't be a headstone. Yeah. But if there was a headstone, if it had my name and said he made a difference, that would be good enough for me. I end both of my podcasts, I end with the words, every single episode I end with, be kind. And there was a phrase by the Dalai Lama, be kind whenever possible. It's always possible. Mm. And I just think the world could use a little more kindness. So my mission is to make a difference every day in someone's life. One little difference. A stranger, someone that I know, someone that I love, whoever it might be. If I just do one that day, that's enough. If I can do more than one, that's even better.
Well, Bill, I can tell you're already on the right path, because you've done that for me through your podcast, through your connection with me, through our meetups, and just having time with you. You're on the right path, because you're having an impact on some guy up in Canada. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Everyone, all information for Bill in the show notes. As always, you know how we do things. Please, what I'm asking from everyone that listens to the How to Podcast show is to go and check out Bill's shows, to listen. When you listen to the entirety of every episode that you listen to, and leave him some feedback. Leave him reviews. Leave him whatever he has out there that you can do to respond. Please do that, and let Bill know that you're connecting with him, because I want to encourage him on his mission to do exactly what he said and to leave that impact on others. So everyone, please, I'm asking you to do that. Let's support each other as podcasters. Bill, again, thank you so much for being on the How to Podcast series.
Thank you, Dave, and be kind.
Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast all the way through to the end. I love having these great guest co-hosts on the show to share their podcast with you. You have some homework to do. What I'm asking of you is to go check out our featured guest co-host today. Go over and listen to their podcast. The links are always in the show notes. And I'd love for you to go and give them your love and support. And I think if we can all do that for each other, podcasting will be a lot more fun for all of us. So it's time to do what you've asked others to do for you. It's time to do for this guest co-host. Links in the show notes. Go over and check out their show and leave them a review, do the follow, go listen to their episodes in full, the entirety of an episode, which again shows to the apps that it's a good podcast because you're going there and you're staying to the end. Probably one of the best ways you can help a podcaster grow their audience and be shown to more people is by simply going and listening wherever you listen to the very end, like you're doing right now here. This is the perfect way to signal to wherever you're listening on, this is a podcast worth promoting. And all of the apps want you to stay on as long as possible. So go over and listen to our guest co-host episode and leave them some feedback. If they have a buy me a coffee, send them a coffee. If they have a speak pipe, send them a voice message. If they have an email, send them an email. If they're on Instagram, send them a direct message. Do something to support our guest co-hosts. They've given up their time to be here with you, to be here with me, and we can give that back to them with time and attention, our love, our support. Thank you for doing all that for me as well. Here on the How to Podcast series, we'll talk to you soon for our next episode.